Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. Don't forget you can read my work on ESPN.com. Today I'm joined by Kevin Sheehan, who of course hosts a show on the Team 980, also has his own podcast. Listen to it. He does a very good job. Has done it a good job, great job for years. So I always like talking to Kevin. I go on his show a lot, so I want to bring him on my show every so often. So always a good conversation with him. We talk a lot about the defense and what the defense needs to do. Have they done enough, or what level is the defense at based on what we know of the moves in the offseason to date? Anyways, so we talk about the offense, talk about a lot of things. Is the interest back to what it was pre whatever year you want to pick, when things started to go south for the franchise? So anyways, get into all that. Stay tuned for that. Now, don't have a whole lot to go on before that. I will be back on Thursday with another episode. We'll have another one Monday, even though it's Memorial Day. And for you Gold members, I'll be doing a private Zoom at some point next week, probably a week from Thursday, because we have the first OTA session on the 28th, which is a Wednesday. And so be able to give you a little bit more insight and hopefully have someone else on who can join me to just provide some more insight, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, folks, I don't have anything else because not a whole lot is going on. I will say I was at a luncheon today with where Mark Klaus spoke. The team president was interviewed, and there's really nothing to update you on the stadium stuff. Still think it's going to pass. The one thing that is noteworthy in the situation is the DC council has still not gotten the budget from the mayor, because the mayor can't do anything until Congress approves their budget. And so they haven't even gotten it yet, which means July 15th, folks, I don't know that that's going to happen, because the council will probably get the budget sometime in the next week or so, and then they have 70 days to approve it. So we're probably looking realistically end of July, maybe into early August. So anyways, that's one little update. Now, here's my conversation with the Team 980's Kevin Sheehan. All right, Kevin. Well, first of all, the stuff we talk about off air is probably way better and more interesting. And people would like that maybe a little bit more, but probably can't go down those roads the way we do anyways. But I do want to go sticking to on the field with the Commanders, and just in general, your sense of their offseason, because we're at the point where getting the OTA starting up here in a week. What has been what's been your take on their offseason?
I think number one is that, starting with the Marshawn Lattimore trade at the trade deadline, they recalibrated the recalibration, and they recognized we got it right with the quarterback. We've got a chance to win the Super Bowl this year in 2024. And we have, a legitimate reason to really go after taking advantage of a superstar quarterback on a rookie deal. So Lattimore and Tunsil and Debo, and I think they would have swung big for Myles Garrett had he been available. I think there's been interest in Trey Hendrickson. Maybe there still is. We'll see what happens there. So that's number one. Now, having that desire and being able to execute fully on it are two different things, because sometimes these players aren't available. Sometimes you can't swing big. But I think overall that was the mindset. Number two is I just don't know how much better they got on defense. And I don't know that any of us are going to know until they start playing games. Sometimes defense just gets better because defense is very variable year to year, and year two in the same system with players that maybe we're not even thinking of, a Jordan McGee or a Johnny Newton's going to be a hell of a lot better. And they know that, more than we do. But if they're not better significantly on defense, especially against the run, last year it was Barkley 3 times, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Derrick Henry, even a guy like Bucky Irving. This year they're going to get, in week 2, Josh Jacobs, week 3, Genty. They're going to get Bijan Robinson in week 4, and they're going to get much better quarterbacks this year.
Right.
So I don't know what their defense is going to look like, but there's nothing that would convince me that what they did in the offseason means they're going to be much better. I'm not discounting the possibility that they might be better, but to me, that's the key to the season, because barring injury to the quarterback, they're going to be good on offense again, and really good.
Right. And I think let's stay on defense first, because I agree. Like, I do think that the defensive line is better, but we don't know to what degree. I think the depth is better, 1 through 9, 10, however many they keep. I think the depth is more I think their talent is more consistent throughout that than it was a year ago. But
Right.
what does that mean? So is the line your biggest concern, or is there another area on the D that you are more concerned with?
Well, where's the pass rush going to come from? They had 10.5 sacks from Fowler Jr. Look, year 2 may be about scheming, Frankie Louvu up as a dominant, third down pass rusher. Or maybe it's Dietrich Wise, or maybe, it's Armstrong, who had a really good postseason, but to me, where they got hurt the most last year, and they were able to survive it a lot because they had a great quarterback who delivered over and over again in the clutch moments. But can they stop the run, especially, in that 3 gap, in that C gap and outside of it, and that's where they got gashed over and over again. And they played great running backs last year. The litany of running backs that they faced, I just mentioned, I don't think any team faced the true elite backs in the game. And they got Barkley 3 times, and you're going to get Barkley twice again this year, maybe more than twice, hopefully. That's what I want to see. I want to see that they're better at stopping the run. Because, John, when you think about it, teams may not have known for the first 4 to 6, maybe even 7 weeks, how good Washington was on offense and how good Jayden was. But the emphasis this year will be our best defense is going to be our offense. We've got to possess the football and keep it away from number 5 and keep them off the field. And if you can run the football against Washington, you might be able to do that. They did that last year. He just overcame it over and over again until they couldn't in the championship game. And I thought if Jahmyr Gibbs had gotten more than 14 carries, that game may have turned out differently.
Yeah, no kidding. I think Ben Johnson actually helped him in that game because that made no sense to me. But they played well. But in the Eagles game too, it was turnovers and stopping the run. But that's where it goes. So I'm going to give you, like, my contention would be with the pass rush. Yes, they lost Dante. I didn't think he was very effective as a pass rusher in the second half of the year. And I think if they wanted to keep him, they easily could have. And I'm not many teams I think were clamoring to get him. But it's also, like, to your point, setting that edge. And he's a pass rusher, not an edge setter.
Exactly.
So I think that's where they'll be better, is setting that edge and being a little bit more stout in there. But again, we don't know until you see it. So I don't know if the pass rush will be necessarily worse than last year, but the run defense has got to be better. And I think that's where, like, if Farrell is healthy, I think Dorrance does a nice job. Dietrich Wise, it's funny because depending who you talk to, he's a pass rusher. No, he's a run stopper. These guys think he can set the edge. That's what they're going in there with. So, but that's been my contention. If you can set that edge better, now you give Wagner a better chance to get to the ball, right? If they're going to bounce it or cut it back in. And I think that's imperative too.
And every year it's just weird with defense. It's just so much variance. You just
it's like a bullpen in baseball.
Yeah, I mean,
the quarterbacks you're facing.
Remember the 22 defense here was a top 10 statistical defense.
Right.
And then in 23, it was slightly different, not significantly different. It was as bad as any in the league. I like so many years doing this like you have, I've always thought it's really hard to advance to a Super Bowl and win it if you can't run it when you need to run it and stop the run when you need to stop the run. But they just kept proving over and over again last year. They kept winning games, even though in some of those games they were giving up 5+ yards a carry. Yeah. But that's what great offense can do. But ultimately it caught up with them. Turnovers, yes, too, in the championship game. Yeah. But the first run from scrimmage, touchdown, 60 yards.
Well, and that was, I always go back to that. That's Dante Fowler. And I like Dante.
Yeah.
I thought you guys said, but he makes this spin move to go inside and and he trips up Wagner. It was just a bad job by him on that play. Yeah. But the other part, Kevin, too, is when I look at this roster going into the offseason, I still felt it might take 2 off seasons to get to the level where you say you know more of what you have. Like they can still have a
A
good year
hundred
this
percent.
year. Yeah,
Totally agree with that.
yeah.
I did something today actually in my own podcast, which is why I'm looking at something as I did the work earlier today. Not that it's hard work, but Saquon Barkley in 3 games
Over 2
rushed
billion.
for 414 yards and 7 touchdowns against Washington, nearly 6 yards a carry. And if you add up Barkley, Henry, Bijan Robinson, and Gibbs, 741 yards and 13 touchdowns, 5.92 yards per carry. So this year, you're going to get Josh Jacobs in week 2. You're going to get Genty in week 3, Bijan Robinson in week 4, that rookie Hampton in week 5, DeAndre Swift in week 6. And Swift averaged over 7 yards against him in the Hail Mary game.
Yeah.
You still have Gibbs. You have Barkley twice. You have Aaron Jones. You've got the Seattle running backs when they're healthy. Walker the third and Charbonnet are good.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to stop the run because these teams are also better at throwing the football than a lot of the teams they faced last year. So, you never know what these teams will look like when you get there, but defense for me is the biggest mystery entering 2025.
So because it's funny because the focus from outside the building has been on get that edge rusher.
Yeah.
And which I think is important. I strongly believe they're still monitoring that situation. And I don't think that
Me too.
I don't think guys like Von Miller and Jadeveon Clowney are in a big rush to get into OTAs. So these guys can want them. It doesn't mean these guys want to sign just yet. And so just for everybody else, but it is, I do agree with you. I still think for all of that, the number one issue coming into the offseason for me was the run defense for exactly what you said. And it's why I also applaud what they've done offensively in building up that offensive line for the reverse of that.
The other thing too, John, that I don't have an answer to, maybe you do, but I didn't think they had bad players last year. You've talked about Fowler Jr. He was a terrible edge setter and run stopper, which is why, which is why, in that championship game, once Philly got a lead, he didn't play. Because you didn't have a lot of pass rushing situations. But, Luvu's a good player. Wagner's a good player. I've always been way over the top, I know, on Deron Payne, but he's capable of being a high-level player. I thought the safeties did a decent job last year. So there was a disconnect for me as to whether or not it was talent or scheme. I guess they added size with Kinlaw and Wise and Goldman. They wanted to get bigger, and I think Kinlaw is a versatile guy who might play, a little bit of D end as much as he might play inside. But I can't wait to see what they do, and hopefully it's improved. Because if it isn't, it's not a 12-win team. It still might be a 10-win team because they'll be so good on offense. But it's not a 12-win first and second round, home field advantage team if they're not better on defense. And
I think that's where I go back to maybe needing that one more offseason to get to the point where, not that they can't be that, because we didn't expect it, last year people weren't talking 12 wins, but to get to the point where you go into the season anticipating this is a 12-win team. And we know that based on what we look at. But I agree. I think that's when where, especially when you look at the schedule, that it's a tougher schedule, tougher for everybody in the NFC East. So that you start with that there, and how do you handle that? And you have more primetime games. How does that wear on you, et cetera? And so I think there's a lot of factors that they're going to have to overcome this year. But I agree. Like I don't know just yet. And the other part, Kevin, too, is I thought Jeremy Chin helped them. I don't know how Will Harris, what's the drop off, if any? Can you get a guy like Keim Madrano coming in and helping you as a big nickel? If so, when? He's a 6th-round pick. He's got skills that translate there, but when does it translate? So there are other factors, but the size thing, and it's funny because when in Dallas, Dan Quinn, typically they were going a little bit smaller with their D-line. Right. And John Allen was going smaller as he got older because he wanted to maintain the quickness. So I'll be curious to see how that helps. And then the trickle down from Goldman to Johnny Newton, like having a big guy over the center allows Newton to play more 3 technique, which for them on the pass rush, they hope helps. So there's But that I do think that's the big mystery going in the year. And I don't know, like the one thing too, Kevin, I think that they're good at is self-scouting. So if there is a scheme thing, I don't think they're going to give it lip service as to what they need to do with it. So which I think is a departure from some other staffs that I've been around. So,
Yeah.
but I think that is the thing. And, what about like for you, the safeties? Is that a big, beyond the defensive line? What would be the next big question for you on defense?
My next big question mark is Marshawn Lattimore. Did they get the Marshawn Lattimore they think they traded for?
Right.
Because if they did, that's huge for them because he
Yeah.
was not Marshawn Lattimore for them at the end of last year, injury wise and acclimation to a new, system. That's my, you know, can they stop the run more so than they did last year? Have to. And then Marshawn Lattimore would be my next question. I do think they'll scheme up some pass rush,
Yeah, me
and I
too.
think they've got some guys, but what did they get in Lattimore? Ultimately, did they get the Marshawn Lattimore from, those Pro Bowl, years in New Orleans, or was it a trade that's going to make them look bad in hindsight?
And what level does he need to play at for you? And there's to me, two questions with him is what level will he play at, but how many games will he play? Because he's had a lot of injuries over the last few years.
Yeah, he's got to be healthy to play at the level that he's played at. And he's
Mhm.
had availability issues. So I want to see the Marshawn Lattimore of a few years ago. I want to see him as an outstanding cover corner who also is fearless as a tackler. They haven't had, I think Sanders still has a chance to be a really good corner.
Me
We'll
too.
see about Trey Amos and if that allows Sanders still to move to maybe a more natural inside position. But Lattimore, you traded multiple picks. You traded 8 picks for 3 players, from the trade deadline on. Lattimore, Tunsil, and Debo. Debo's was low risk. Tunsil and Lattimore, you paid for them to be their very best when
Mhm.
they were at their very best. So I hope we can see that this year.
Yeah, and I think that's one reason why I'm glad for them that they got Amos, because if Lattimore is missing or whatever, you at least now have another guy who's a true outside corner
Right.
to replace him. What about for on offense? As you said, like what are your expectations for a Debo and how much can he add here?
A lot. I've got big expectations. It's a contract year. Let's hope, knock on wood, he comes in shape. That will be, I think, crucial for him. But I can't wait to see Kingsbury use him. I think he's going
Me
to
too.
line up in the backfield. I think he's going to be used in motion. I think there's fly sweeps, jet sweeps,
Yeah.
screens. I think the intermediate passing game, I think we'll see him in the backfield with Eckler. I think we'll see him in the backfield with, maybe Robinson Jr., maybe somebody else. We'll see what happens between now and opening day. But I have high expectations for Debo. I clearly have high expectations for Tunsil, and we'll see what happens with the Coleman moving inside, which I think will happen.
Yeah.
If Connerly Jr. is ready to go at right tackle, and year 2, Kingsbury back, Jayden. I
That's
don't expect a sophomore slump. I would
yeah.
like to see more firepower in the backfield. Availability is everything with Eckler and Brian Robinson Jr. I was hoping that they'd be able to add, one of the backs that was truly kind of a mid-round. I maybe Merritt's the guy. Who knows? But I'd be shocked if Jayden Daniels is healthy for 17 if this isn't once again a top 5 kind of offensive football team.
What gives you, I agree with you on that, but what gives you I mean, I'm close to it because I'm out there all the time, but what gives you that confidence with Jayden?
The 17 games he played last
And
year.
that's a kind of a dumb question, but
Yeah.
because I look at it like the thing that always jumped out to me was because we've seen other guys come through here and play well for a year, but you see other things. And with Jayden,
Yeah,
what I always saw with him
you're
was the
out
work he
there.
put in.
We both talk to a lot of people. This is the real deal in terms of the person, the
Right.
effort, the work ethic, the humility, the ability to learn. The everything about it. I mean, here's one thing I don't want to see this year. I don't want to see him lead the team in rushing 10 games.
Correct.
And it's not because like I'm so scared of him getting hurt or that I don't want him to be a part of the run game. Of course I want him to be a part of the run game, both as a scrambler and as a, designed an option runner. But he shouldn't be the leading rusher in 10
Right.
games this year.
Well, and that was my problem down the stretch, and that's why I'm glad they attacked the offensive line because down the stretch, the O line I didn't think was doing a good job in the run blocking area, the whole unit as a whole, and the backs weren't able to create enough on their own to compensate, and so he had to provide that, which is why I'm glad you go out, you get a little bit bigger inside with Coleman, and you get a guy out, some athleticism outside with Connolly and Tunsil. So I
Right.
think I think that helps. And I think they're also adding a guy like Jalen Lane and a healthy Noah Brown for a full training camp and all that will
Yeah.
be. I think Lane can be one of those guys that you're not going to use him like Debo, but you can use him in multiple ways. That I think I just picture Cliff Kingsbury with that meme with all these math equations bouncing around his head with
Yeah.
ways that he can use guys.
Well,
So,
Lane's definitely right now in their mind's eye the punt returner.
oh yeah,
He was the number one punt returner on their board, and they could use a guy. They needed to improve on returns and on kicking. And Matt Gay and Jalen Lane can hopefully provide answers there.
I mean, Jalen Lane, like if you give your stomach, I mean, you get 10, 20-yard gains on occasion, that's pretty big for
No,
an
imagine
athlete.
if they had takeaways last year and better return, more consistent return
Mhm.
situations. How much that would have helped an offense that really didn't need that much help to begin
Right.
with.
Well, and that's the other thing, not going back to the defense, but the takeaways was all this talk about all this. It's the takeaways that were really killed them because
Yeah,
shoot, remember in 2012, that defense wasn't statistically great, but their takeaways were tremendous.
yeah,
And it elevated their play. When you can, if you're not going to stop this, if you're taking the ball away, now you have a good thing going there. So I think that's one thing. Also, I do want to ask you too about we've both been around a while, obviously, but you've been on the radio taking calls from listeners for a long time. Where's the interest level at going into this year? Where is it back to? How far back is everything in your opinion?
God, I've talked a lot about this because you and I have probably talked about this off the air if we haven't talked about it on the air. They're not sold out yet, at least as of a few weeks ago
Mhm.
for the upcoming
Right,
season.
right.
They didn't sell out the majority of their games last year. With one of the bottom third capacity stadiums in the league, TV ratings were negligible in terms of compared to the year before. I often think that we live, you and I and everybody that does this in a bubble. That bubble's gotten much bigger. The
Yeah,
tent's
yeah.
gotten much larger, clearly. And I think it's on the verge of really getting even much bigger than it was last year. But I was surprised that ultimately they weren't selling out quickly, that the TV ratings weren't off the charts locally, and that they haven't sold out for next year, and that there are plenty of good seats still available given what they just accomplished.
And
I have a lot of theories on that, but I'm
what
surprised that coming off that kind of a season, more times than not, you've got a massive demand for season tickets.
why do you think it's
Well,
worked?
part of what I think, and
Right.
that is I think that there's still a big portion of the fan base over the age of 40 or 45 years old that just doesn't feel it like they used to. I think it's twofold. It's the wearing down of the Snyder years, and then a big part of it is the name. I still have so many of my friends that were diehard season ticket holders. Do they watch more than they used to? Yeah, but just it doesn't feel the same. The name, uniforms, brand, it just felt like an expansion team landed here in 2022, and it's never risen to the level of passion that it used to. Now, maybe they don't care. We don't have, you and me and people that are our age don't have the same lifetime value to them that the 25-year-old has. And so they may capture that fan and grow with that fan into the new stadium in 2030. But the people with the most disposable income are not as passionate as maybe the people with lesser disposable income. That may explain it.
And how much do you think another, like, if they have back to back good years, and good year to me could be if they go 10-7 to make the playoffs, that to me is a good year for them, right? Because I think that's a tough schedule, et cetera. And to repeat it, be the first time they get back to back playoffs since 91, 92.
Yeah.
How much, do you think that's enough? Do you think they have to win it to get back to where they were? Or is that just.
No, I think, they have a chance because they've got an elite quarterback to be a sustained contender.
Right.
That's the number one requirement to be a sustained contender. Right. It's not ownership. It's not defense. It's not a running back. It's a quarterback. We've seen that now for 25 years. If you have an elite quarterback, if you have one of those 3 or 4 or 5, you've got a chance year in and year out to win more games than you lose and to be in the postseason. So that'll eventually just bring in so many more people. I also want to go back and just add, I think for people like you and me, it was phenomenal last year. The bubble, the tent got much bigger. And I felt that, in what I do, no doubt. I was just surprised that a lot of the ticket selling and a lot of the TV ratings didn't kind of come along with that. But yeah, I mean, look, I can only speak for myself and a lot of people my age that I know and talk to all the time. I don't feel the way I used to feel about the team. I love Jayden Daniels. I'm vested in him because I loved him going back to his junior year at LSU. And I know how much winning is much better for me. And it's more fun to talk and analyze and pretend we're experts about a winning team than, the negative stuff that was just, pervasive for so long. So I enjoy that they are competent, they're good people, and they got a great quarterback and by extension, a team that's going to be a sustained contending team for a while. That's my belief. And so I enjoy it, but I don't feel the same way I felt 10 years ago, but that was waning even before the name change, but
the Snyder fatigue, I think, got a lot of people.
There was a lot of wearing down by Snyder.
It took a long time to wear it down. It's not going to be rebuilt to where it was overnight.
Yeah.
But I do think like being around them and like I was at an event with Mark Klaus today. Like he's just impressive. Like they have a lot more impressive people in the organization in multiple spots, and that's how you build a good organization. And so, last thing is too, like over under. I guess the line is like 9.5 wins is the over under.
Over. I think though that they could be a better team this year and not have 12 wins.
Right.
But I'm 9.5 seems like a totally fair number, and I just believe in Jayden and I believe in Kingsbury. And I think that they can win a lot of games with great offense. And then the truth is, how much worse could the defense be? It was effective at times, but it was the third worst rush defense in the league in yards allowed. It was, per DVOA, it was like the 4th or 5th worst defense against the run. It was like the 6th worst defense overall. I believe in their coaching staff. And so, I say over.
Yeah, I would go in the year as probably 10 wins just because of schedule and there's a lot more challenges in there, not just the teams, but I think navigating the travel schedule, the prime time schedule, it's a lot.
It is a lot.
But I do think like I have always liked, even last year going into the year, Kevin, I would say I don't know what they're going to be this year, but I know long term I like what they're building. And I would say the same thing this year. Like I don't know how good. I think they'll be a 10-win team at this point, but I always like their long-term potential. Obviously because of Jayden, you got that guy. Like you could tell early on that he was that guy, but also because I think you have the right people making decisions in the organization to build it.
But make no mistake, without the one decision that they made at quarterback,
correct.
That's a 5-12, 6-11 football team. Even if the arrow's pointing up because of the people being good people and smart people, and we would believe that there's a chance that this is going to play out on the field. but they got the most important
Yeah,
thing
for sure.
right.
And it's
And
about, and
that's,
like, if any
yeah,
fan base, I grew up in Cleveland, like there are two fan bases that
yeah,
needed to get a quarterback. One of them got it. So, that's, but I'll be honest, like you're right. Like it was a lot of fun to watch, not just to watch him play, but to learn about him and to
yeah,
learn why he plays a certain way. Like, why is he good? It's not because he's just talented, it's because he's talented and then the work he puts into it. And then you had an offensive, like, I only got about 2 minutes here, but then you have like Kingsbury. It was go back. Caleb Williams went to a bad place for him. Jayden Daniels went to a perfect place for him. The support system around him from Kingsbury to Tavita Pritchard, Blau, and then Marcus
yeah.
Mariota, and then you bring in guys like Zach Ertz. They did a really good job of building around the quarterback, and I think they continued that this offseason,
I
which
agree.
is going to make him better. So I think it's fun. It was fun to just talk about football all year.
I mean, for all those years, people would say, "Oh my, you guys love this stuff." No, 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 no. We would love winning so much more. Look, 8-8, 7-9 every year with no drama wouldn't have been good. And
No,
so, if you're gonna suck, it was great that it came with all the drama, I guess.
that's
Because we almost like I would always say, like we're such a community, the fan base, and this bigger bubble than it was before. And it's the biggest bubble in town by far,
right,
and
right.
always has been and always will be. But there is this sense of like, we wallowed together in this misery, and there was a community around wallowing in misery. And yet we rejoiced in the few opportunities we had, but those opportunities were always much better than the opposite. And now we have, we had a whole season of not only really good football and a superstar quarterback, but we had dramatic games. I mean,
Yeah.
we had
Oh, it was awesome.
memorable
Yeah, it
games
was fun. It was a
last
lot of
year.
fun.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. And I think we all were owed that. And I think we're all owed long-term success. So, Kevin, thank you
Yeah.
very much, man. Always appreciate it.
Thanks, John, so much. Always a pleasure.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Kevin for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back on Thursday with another episode. I'll talk to you next time.